It's so lovely to be here. And thank you to everyone who made this possible both 3 weeks ago when Wednesday got snowed out. And today I'm really delighted to be here at Barnard. And before I get started with this talk, Gaping, Gawking, Staring, Living in My Bodies, I want to do a couple of things. The first is to do some access check-in. For those of you who can hear, how's my volume? If that changes, let me know. Holler, wave your hand, however you want to catch my attention and we'll renegotiate the volume. But don't throw rotten tomatoes, they just make a lot of mess. For those of you who are going to be using the screen to access the PowerPoint, how is the light for you? Is it okay here? Do you need more light? Does anyone need more light? Because we can do more light and it's very bright. We have this very dim and then very bright. Those are the two options. So how's the light right now for folks? Okay, and again, if that changes, let's stop what we're doing and renegotiate that. I also want to remind us that we can mash this room up in a variety of ways. If you need to get up and pace, please do that. If you need to sit or lie on the floor, there's floor space. I know there's floor space up here, and I promise that I don't bite. If you need to leave and not come back, or if you need to leave and then come back later, do that. If you listen best by knitting, please knit. If you need to rock, if you need to stim, if you need to flap your hands, do that. In other words, let's mash the space up as much as possible to make it as accessible for as many of us as possible. And speaking of access, food, more food than we'll ever be able to consume. So as people want more food, let's just get up and get food. So the second thing I want to do before I get started with the main talk is to acknowledge that we're on occupied indigenous land, particularly Lenape land, and that everything we do in the U.S. is done on occupied indigenous land. And the third thing is to recognize that we're in a time of great despair, fear, and for many of us individually and in the community, a great time of desperation. And we're also in a time of great resistance. We're in a time of resistance, the like of which hasn't happened since the 1960s. And in my life, along with the despair and desperation, it is really important to recognize the time of resistance too. And it's my greatest hope that this evening will be, in some fashion, part of that resistance. Maybe in little daily ways for us, and maybe for some of us in bigger ways. So, and to create more access, I'm going to be doing some other description of the images on the screen. So, on this screen is the title slide of the talk called Gaping, Gawking, Staring, Living in My bodies. And the purpose of this talk is to really bring images of marked bodies into the space, explore how our bodies marked, how our bodies stolen away, and then to explore how do we resist that thievery, how do we reclaim our bodies. The image on this slide is the spoken word Maria Palacios, who performs in a number of places, including with disabled people of color and queer disabled people, performance project based out of the Bay Area called Sins Invalid. And if you're curious about their work, Google Sins Invalid and you'll find their website and a number of really awesome YouTubes. So this is an image of spoken word poet Maria Palacios. We see a Latina woman sitting, her head flung back, long dark hair hanging over her shoulder. Her blouse is cut to reveal both shoulders. It's a sexy pose. Her arms extend down, hands push against the wheels of the manual wheelchair she sits in. So as I said before, this talk is both about how our bodies are marked, stolen, erased, and used by a variety of mechanisms, and how we resist and reclaim our bodies. The talk's not meant to be exhaustive. You know, to be exhaustive about this talk, we would need, a year and a half of talking. We would need 500 PhD dissertations. We'd need 1,000 activist hours telling stories, creating strategies, taking to the streets. There's no way to be exhaustive about this topic. Instead, I'm going to be really idiosyncratic. I'm also going to be talking across community lines and across identity lines. And that's not about making analogies. I have no interest in saying that ableism, which is the system of oppression that targets disabled people and people who are perceived to be disabled, I have no interest in making an analogy between ableism and racism, or between sexism and Islamophobia. This isn't about creating ableism, creating an analogy, or saying they're the same instead, or about erasing specificities. You know, there are specificities of racism that are really important, and specificities of sexism that are really important. And so in speaking across community lines and identity lines and lines of systems of oppression, it's not about erasing or creating analogies. Instead, I want to explore similar mechanisms that cross those lines. So you may, at this point in the talk, be thinking, what does Eli mean by stolen bodies? He said stolen bodies about half a dozen times, but what does that mean? So to define that phrase, I'm going to think about fatness and fat phobia. So this first image is a movie poster of the documentary Super Size Me. The poster shows the headshot of a white man with his mouth stuffed with French fries. And who's seen Super Size Me? Some of you, but not all of you. So I'm going to do a brief description of supersize me, so what I say then will make some sense. So this is a documentary of a food experiment that Morgan Spurlock, who's the guy pictured in this poster, he decided to eat nothing but McDonald's food for 30 days. Come on in. Come on in. Thanks for being here. And when you get settled, help yourself to some food also. So he decided to make a documentary of this experiment of 30 days of eating nothing but McDonald's food. And one of his rules was that when a cashier said, "Do you want to supersize that meal?" he had to say yes, and then he had to eat all of the food. And so part of the documentary is the story of what happens to his health. You know, it's an experiment that's a vegetarian's nightmare, right? And do we need a documentary to tell us that 30 days of nothing but McDonald's food is bad for your health? But that was the gimmick. And the story is that on day 25, his health had declined precipitously. His general physician said, "Morgan, your liver looks like you've been drinking hard for 20 years." His blood pressure was up, his kidney functions were down. But the movie, which is partly about health, rather than taking seriously these markers of health, instead uses endless images of fat people. You get images of fat people's bodies with their faces blurred out. You get shots of fat people's stomachs and fat people's behinds. You get the humor that's made on the backs of fat people, the point about health is entirely made through this humor targeting fat people. Fat ends up equaling lack of health, not liver function, not blood pressure, but fatness. And then the theater I first saw the film in, the film provoked laughter again and again and again. The whole theater laughing at fat people. And so fatness is used as a cautionary tale about health and about food. And this kind of fat phobia precisely is what I mean by stealing bodies away. Fatness becomes a metaphor, becomes a cautionary tale, rather than part of what it means to live in many, many different sized and shaped bodies. So fat phobia is stealing the experience of living in whatever sized and shaped body someone lives in. And let me show you the second image just to underline some of that. The second image is a photo of a slender, blonde, white woman in a bikini looking at her backside in a full-length mirror and seeing herself as a fat woman with a large butt. So this this is what fat phobia looks like. Fat phobia impacting not only fat people, but people of all sizes who are fearing being fat. And this is also about the role of the media to create and reflect lies. And here the lie is that it's bad and wrong to be fat, that some shaped and sized bodies are wrong and bad, and the others are right and good. And so in part in defining stolen bodies, I'm talking about the role of the media to steal our bodies away, to participate in this kind of thievery. So does that help people think about what I mean by the phrase stolen bodies? Yes? So let's move now to the notion of reclaimed bodies. So if supersize me is a media representation from the inside out, the image on this slide, which I'll describe in a moment, is an image made from inside an experience. So I would argue that supersize me is made from the outside, and this image is made from the inside of an experience and reflects one of the million ways bodies look. This image is the cover of a fat liberation zine called Size Queen, and in it a large white woman wears a low-cut, revealing evening gown and a tiara on her head. She stands outside with blue water behind her and holds an empty picture frame in front of her body, positioned so it frames her face and upper body. The tagline reads, "For queen-size queers and their loyal subjects." So there's humor here, there's overt sexiness here. The zine is part of the liberation movement, part of the fat liberation movement, with the purpose of reclaiming and liberating. So another image to define reclaimed bodies is this image of 4 of the dancers from a queer burlesque dance troupe called the Fat Bottom Review. The image is of a black and white. It's a black and white photo of a multiracial group of fat women who sit naked on the floor. They hold each other, looking tremendously at ease with each other, but also protective of each other. And it's really the opposite of creating a metaphor that's a cautionary tale about how it's bad to be fat. Reclaiming fatness, reclaiming the many lived experiences of being fat. And I want to pause here and note the nudity in this image, because as I made this PowerPoint a number of years ago, I noticed that many of the images I picked had a lot of nudity in them. And there was a moment where I said to myself, Eli, what in the world are you doing? Why all this nudity? Cut it out. And I was like, maybe I do need to cut the nudity out, or at least cut some of it out. And then the more I looked at images made from inside marginalized communities, explicitly about reclaiming our bodies, so many of them contained some kind of nudity. And I came to believe that part of this nudity is about saying, I know you have been gaping, I know you have been gawking, I know you've been staring for a long time, really curious about our bodies, really actually imagining what we might look like naked. You've been doing that for a long time without our consent. And now, here we are, naked on our terms, and you had better look. So that the nudity itself is part of the reclamation process. And so I decided to keep the nudity in the slideshow, but talk directly about why I was doing that. And Heather McAllister, who's one of the white women in this photo, is the founder of a queer fat liberation conference and organization called No Lose. And this is a quote from a keynote she gave over a decade ago. And I'm using it here because I think it's a really powerful definition of reclaiming. Heather said, quote, "We can talk about fat liberation until we're blue in the face. But if we don't love our bodies, we will never have it. Our bodies are direct targets of hatred. The true healing has to include a physical component. Surround yourself with fat positive images. Stop reading Cosmo and watching TV. Get naked in front of a full-length mirror. Get a tattoo on the fattest part of your body and show it off. Touch, tattoo, decorate, reveal. Have sex naked with the lights on," end quote. And so when I think of reclaiming bodies, I think of Heather McAllister's quote. So the next thing I'm going to do is talk about 3 mechanisms that steal our bodies away. And with those mechanisms, I'm going to also be talking about ways of reclaiming our body. Our bodies, plural. So the first mechanism I want to talk about is the power of stereotypes. The quote on this slide is a quote that comes from queer, gay black filmmaker Marlon Riggs' film called Ethnic Notions. And if you don't know Marlon Riggs as a filmmaker, go check his films out. He made a really powerful film about gay black men's experience called Tongues Untied. Just powerful documentary films. And in this film, Ethnic Notions, he says it all about the power of living with lies and stereotypes. The damage of living with stereotypes and lies. He says in the narration of Ethnic Notions, quote, "Mimi, Sambo, Pickaninny, Coon, Uncle, the great-grandparents of many modern images of blacks, these caricatures did as much harm as any lynch mob True, their hurt was often indirect, yet because of this, they have left wounds that have proved far more difficult to heal, end quote. And this is such a powerful and bold and really strong statement about the power of stereotypes, because lynching is this incredibly long and painful and damaging history of the United States, starting mainly, I don't know, lynching started almost the moment white people came to North America, but really ramped up after slavery ended. And lynching was this practice that was both about killing individual black people, particularly black men, and causing incredible fear among whole communities of black people. And there's a history we're not done with, the history that extends today. I only have to think about President Obama's campaigns, both of his campaigns for presidential campaigns, when nooses were found in a number of places and effigies of him were hung in trees. That history isn't just history, that history is also still with us. And so for Riggs to compare stereotypes, the damage of stereotypes, to the damage of lynching, is to say something really profound about the power of stereotypes to damage and to steal bodies away. And in thinking about that thievery, I want to show two images of stereotypes of black people that have functioned to steal the real lived experience away from black people and black communities. The first is the stereotype of Aunt Jemima. In this image, we see a box of Aunt Jemima pancake mix. It's a light blue cardboard, and on the box is a picture of an African-American woman wearing a headscarf, and she has a wide smile on her face, showing her teeth. And this, of course, is the stereotype of the mammy, of a caretaker, of hired help, of the cook. It's a stereotype of black women as endlessly nurturing and cheerful. It's this stereotype that reduces the range of black women's experiences and feelings to this very narrow set of feelings and roles that are always in relationship to taking care of white women. It steals that whole range, the whole humanity of black women gets stolen away through this stereotype. This particular box is from the 1980s, but these images have a long history dating back to the 1910s. Marlon Riggs explores that history really well in Ethnic Notions. And Aunt Jemima is still with us today. You just have to look at pancake syrup bottles to know that this stereotype is with us today. The second stereotype I want to name is this one. This image is a caricature of an angry black man his left hand balled up into fist. He has wild hair and a wild look on his face. The background is red and orange, and the tagline on the top is assertive and belligerent ? This particular image comes from an ad for the antipsychotic drug Haldol from the 1960s. In this image, the stereotype, this lie of the belligerent, angry, assertive black man, again, has a really long history and is very much alive today, very, very current, and the damage of it is high. So these are two of the stereotypes that Marlon Riggs talks about, and are stereotypes that steal real lived experience away, steal his bodies away. And the role of stereotypes in that thievery isn't exclusive to black community and black people. We could spend the rest of the evening talking about the various of the extreme stereotypes in many communities that limit, constrain, prompt active violence. So this mechanism of the stereotype crosses a lot of community lines. And so now I want to turn to resisting stereotypes, to reclaiming our bodies from the thievery of stereotypes, and think particularly in this slide about how that resistance is held in our bodies. This image, which I'll describe in just a moment, is of performance artist Craig Hickman. And in both the image and the quote, he's really crumbling a whole bunch of stereotypes, racist stereotypes, homophobic stereotypes, and transphobic stereotypes, crumbling them to dust. In this image is a dark-skinned, androgynous person sitting on a bench. Their hair is in braids and put up on the top of their head. They sit with their upper bodies slightly turned and their legs folded. They stare into the camera, both fierce and resigned. And he says, quote, "I'm a black, gay performance artist, man enough to let his woman shine, and woman enough to let his man roar. I'm often seen by people as a, what's that? To which I usually respond, isn't beautiful enough." So taking all those stereotypes, all those intertwined stereotypes, and resisting them, rebelling them, crumbling them to dust. So now I want to turn to a second mechanism, and before I switch the slides, I want to make a content note that this next slide, the image on it, is of a medical textbook exhibit. And it's a distressing and disturbing image because it's non-consensual, and it's about nudity, and it's about bodies being turned into objects. And that's the mechanism we're going to be talking about, how bodies are turned into objects. So just a heads up about this next image. As I said, the mechanism is bodies being turned into objects, and then I've purposely resisted talking about sexual objectification. Like we talk to them about sexual objectification, but we often don't talk about other kinds of objectification of bodies and how that objectification steals bodies away. So that's why I'm using this as an example. This image of the medical textbook exhibition is a common kind of picture to many groups of people. This one is specifically of intersex people, and I'll define intersex briefly in a moment. But this kind of medical textbook pictures common to disabled people, common to fat people, common to people of color. So it's a kind of objectification that crosses many community lines. This specific image is black and white, and it's divided into 5 panels. And in each panel is a naked child standing stiffly and completely naked against a black background. A black bar covers each child's eyes. On the right edge of each panel, a ruler is being held to measure the height of each child. And underneath each panel are notations of the child's age and sex chromosome. And the children in this image are intersexed people. Intersex being a word to describe folks that are either born with primary sex characteristics or grow into secondary sex characteristics that are considered not typical for men or for women. There are many intersex people born every day in the US. Many intersex people who aren't necessarily identified as intersex at birth by doctors, but live with primary and secondary sex characteristics not recognized as typically male or typically female. Hi, come on in. Thanks for being here. And in this picture, the bodies of these intersex people are turned into medical objects. Not when we talk about sexual objectification, we're thinking about how people are turned into sexual objects. But in this image, people and their bodies are turned into medical objects. And in that transformation, bodies and lived experiences are stolen away and turned into mere objects which are justified as teaching tools. And I want to push back on that because often when I talk about this image, there's a medical student or doctor or nurse in the room who's like, yes, but don't we need to use this kind of image to teach doctors or nurses? My response is often, we can do that teaching without turning people's bodies into medical objects. And one last thing, I want to note the nudity here. I want to do the obvious and note nudity here, but in this case, the nudity is not chosen. The nudity is non-consensual. And the extraordinary difference between consensual and non-consensual nudity, that one's about thievery and the other is often about reclamation. So in this animation, the image we now see is painter Sonora Taylor's hacking of this medical textbook image. And what she's done is taken white out and left the bodies, left the intersex people's bodies, but whited them out so they're no longer naked. So it's not erasing the image, it's not saying the image never existed, but it's saying we don't get to gawk at their nudity. And in resistance to this turning of bodies into medical objects, Cheryl Chase, who is an intersex activist who 20 years ago founded the North American Intersex Society of North America. She founded ISNA about 20 years ago. Of the black bars across these people's faces, she says, quote, the black rectangle over the eyes accomplishes only one thing. It saves the viewer from having to endure the gaze of the subject, end quote. So that's this mechanism of bodies as objects, and the way this mechanism steals lived experience and steals bodies away from ourselves and away from whole communities. So now I want to turn to reclamation, actually to two kinds of reclamation and resistance responses. This first is a specific intersex response. This image is a book cover for the book called Intersex in the Age of Ethics, edited by Alice Dreger. It's a collage of black and white photos, some posed with animals, some outside, and many smiling. In the collage, there are 15 photos in total. And all of the photos are self-chosen portraits of intersex people. So the power of self-portrait, the power of self-chosen portrait. And in the middle of the collage is a person posed as if they're in a medical textbook photo. This is a picture actually of Alice Dreger, and it's the only non-intersex person in the collage. And I saw her give a talk just after this book came out, and she told the following story. She was showing the cover to a friend of hers who didn't know anything about the cover at all, and her friend said to her, "Alice, why are you posing naked on this book cover?" So even with the black bar over her eyes, the black bar did nothing to protect her privacy. And again, that is the medical, when providers are asked why the black bars, the answer always is, well, the black bar is to protect people's privacy. And part of the power of the story about this middle picture, the black bar did nothing to protect Draeger's privacy. A second piece of reclaiming bodies from this notion of bodies as objects is a disability response that makes bodies our own subjects. The second image is a self-portrait of disabled painter Riva Lair. And if you want to see more of Riva's work, just Google Riva Lair. She has a website with a lot of her paintings on it. So this is a self-portrait. Again, the power of self-portrait. This is a painter painting herself exactly how she wants us to see her. She stands naked with her back to the viewer. Her hands are interlocked behind her neck. We see the curves in her back, her body distinctly asymmetrical. In the background is a skeleton painted in blue, which Riva is looking at. And what I didn't know until Riva told me this is the skeleton is a unicorn skeleton. And there's something really lovely about Riva saying, here I am naked, look at me naked. Again, the role of nudity in reclamation. Looking at the skeleton of a creature who didn't really exist. There's something really lovely in that kind of imagination of a creature while also reclaiming her own body. So that's another resistance strategy, this idea of bodies as our own subjects. And now I want to turn to a third mechanism of stealing our bodies away, and it's the last mechanism I'll be talking about in this presentation. And that mechanism is this notion that some bodies need to be fixed, some bodies need to be repaired, some bodies need to be cured, some bodies need to be made normal. The image on this slide is a very, very recent image, and I'm using it because it's an image from, I don't know, 3 weeks ago now. It's the image of a meme that started working its way through Facebook right after the physicist Stephen Hawking died. So Stephen Hawking, this very, very famous white disabled man who was non-speaking and a genius physicist and privileged in all sorts of ways, and a voucher user. And in this image, which is a line drawing, we see a figure in silhouette standing with his back towards us, and the figure is looking at stars, and in the foreground is an empty power chair. And the meme that this image was used in makes it really explicit that there were a number of taglines that went with the meme, and all of the taglines, that was some version in death. Stephen Hawking was released from his wheelchair. He was fixed. He had freedom. And this mechanism, this idea that bodies need to be fixed and that Stephen Hawking's body was fixed in death, the story ableism tells here is that freedom equals the absence of disability. There was much acceptance of this meme and much protest against this meme. And the protest was Stephen Hawking was a brilliant physicist who worked for 25 years from his wheelchair. And what do you mean that in death he now gets to stand up and walk away from his wheelchair? It's a way of saying to wheelchair users, you're not whole, and we need to make you walking again. And if you can't walk in your life, we'll make believe that you can walk in your death. It's a way of stealing the experience of being a wheelchair user away from disabled people. And this mechanism of some bodies needing to be fixed targets many communities. I'm thinking of poster children and fundraising for Cure, where the fundraising is always about we're going to cure disabled children's bodies, that children with muscular dystrophy, for instance, are going to, if we just fund enough research for cure, are going to be able to get up and walk. It targets deaf communities with the notion that signing and communicating in the ASL is deficient and defective in some ways, that says the need for oral communication is tantamount, that overall that pushes cochlear implants. This mechanism targets dark communities of people of color, particularly dark-skinned people, and particularly women of color with skin lighteners. It targets LGBT communities with ex-gay and ex-reparative therapy. So in all these examples, there's this notion that some bodies need to be fixed, need to be repaired, need to be cured, and in that impulse, stealing away the lived experience of disability, of being dark-skinned women of color, of being deaf with this very plentiful culture built around American Sign Language, and stealing the experiences of being lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, asexual, saying we're going to fix those experiences. So in resistance to this idea that some bodies need to be fixed is this notion of bodies to celebrate. And I'm using the image on this slide. It comes from a mural on the San Francisco Women's Podium. And murals are public art, murals are communal art, and there's something really important about the communal nature of this image as resistance, because so many of the images of bodies that need to be fixed are of people all alone and in isolation. And this, as a mural, is communal art. And when I was in touch with the collective that created this mural, a collective called Masterpiece, led by Juana Alicia, and I asked her whether I could use this image. She said, yes, But the one thing that I want you to credit the whole group of people who created this mural. So again, putting the collective nature of this particular kind of reclamation at the forefront. The image of two women dancing together in a bright, colorful mural. Both are women of color, one younger and one older. The younger woman uses a manual wheelchair in which she's popping a wheelie. Their hands are clasped and they are happy and engrossed in their dancing. So the opposite of alone, the opposite of isolated, the opposite of this notion that their bodies are wrong and in need of repair. It's claiming the power of community. It's a celebration, and wheelchair dancing is a source of joy. You know, in the Stephen Hawking's image, the wheelchair is something to escape. And in this image, the younger woman's wheelchair is a source of joy, the source of pleasure. So bodies, celebrating bodies as a way of reclaiming bodies from the thievery. But before I make the work of reclamation sound too easy, I want to talk some about the struggle to define ourselves. And to do that, I'm going to be talking about a poem called The Magic Wand by blind black poet Lynn Manning. And the image we see here is a charcoal portrait by Riva Lair. To the painter we saw a self-portrait of several slides ago. And in this charcoal portrait, this black and white portrait, we see a bare-chested African-American man holding a white guide cane vertically in front of him. It extends above his head, and at the top of the cane is the black streak of a comet. Looking closely, it becomes clear that the comet itself is a bullet, which is a reference to the way in which Lynn Manning became blind. And so I am going to read a portion of his poem, The Magic Wand, which is about the struggle to define self in the face of a bunch of intertwined stereotypes. Quick change artist extraordinaire, I whip out my folding cane and change from black man to blind man with a flick of my wrist. It is a profound metamorphosis from God-gifted wizard of round ball dominating backboards across America to God-gifted idiot savant, from rape-driven misogynist to poor motherless child, from welfare-rich pimp to disability-rich gimp, and from white man's burden to every man's burden. My final form is never of my choosing. I only wield the wand. You are the magician. So in this poem, Lynn Manning is talking about this dense maze of overlapping, intersecting, and contradictory racist and ableist stereotypes that he encounters moving through the world as a blind black man, and how he does not control how those stereotypes are placed upon him. And he's also highlighting this chasm between his internal experience of self and the external perception of him. And how that external perception is controlled by the people staring and gawking and observing and seeing him. You, what does he say? I only wield the wand, you are the magician. And I think this is such a deep reflection of how complicated and how ongoing the work of reclamation is, that it's not something that happens once and we're done with it, how it's daily work. And because of that ongoing nature of the work of reclamation, I want to talk about one more mechanism of reclamation and one more example of reclamation, partly so we have more images of reclamation here than we have images of thievery. That I want to not balance the two, but weight this presentation and exploration on the side of reclamation. And this slide is about finding reflection and finding beauty. And it's really about adornment. The image is a fabric artist, Chun Shan Yi. The image is of her sitting on a floor wearing a white dress. Both of her hands and feet are visible, framed at the center of the image. Her feet are bare, and each foot has 2 toes. On her hand, she wears elaborate knit gloves that accentuate the 2 fingers she has on each hand. And then the smaller image, the inset image, we see a close-up of those knit gloves, and they're multicolored red, orange, purple, and they have these long tassels on the end of the gloves. They're really beautiful pieces of fabric art. They're a way of adorning herself, and adornment is all about look, see me as beautiful, see me as pretty. It's about finding beauty. It's about reclaiming a body that, knowing Sandy a little, I know that she had this long medical history of doctors naming her as ugly, doctors and people on the street naming her as ugly. And this is a picture of adornment. This is a picture of see my hands and feet as beautiful. So another way of reclamation. So that's where I want to stop, leaving you with these 3 mechanisms of ways bodies get stolen away, and a number of strategies in the way and ways of reclaiming our bodies. Thank you all for being here. Thanks a lot.